Happy Tuesday. It is Tuesday, March 2nd, 2021, and welcome to another Tuesday with Thom. Tuesday with Thom, of course, is brought to you by our partners, the Best Girl Consulting Firm. Best Girl customizes solutions to issues of leadership, access and inclusion, economic development and communication. Best Girl creates the solutions that fit your need. So 1 year ago today, well, not 1 year ago today, but 1 year ago, we were introduced to the coronavirus. That introduction changed the year 2020 for many of us, and for some of us, it was a drastic change. It was a year unlike any other that I've seen, and we're still talking about, quote, when we get back to normal, unquote. There are 3 vaccines out there now, or at least a strategic plan to get shots in people's arms, so hopefully we're on the right track. Again, welcome. This is the 25th Tuesday with Thom. That's right, number 25. We're proud of that number 25, and we are grateful and thankful to you, the audience, for your support in getting us to number 25. It has been and is a fun ride. We're enjoying it and hope you are, and we love it when we get your comments, so keep them coming. Number 25, I have to be grateful and thankful to several people, and I'm going to be grateful and thankful right now to our regular guests, Barbara Wallace Edwards and Mychal Walker, for the substance and the positive thoughts that they bring to the show every week. As a matter of fact, using the word regular with them is almost a slap in the face, since they are among the original G-listers. As a matter of fact, right now today, in front of all you guys, we're going to put Mychal and Barbara in the G-List Hall of Fame. That's right, the G-List Hall of Fame. I forgot him to tell you I was going to do that so you could do the little clap thing, but that's my fault. So don't worry about it. They're in the G-List Hall of Fame. I'm thankful and grateful for Em and Sean, who make this happen every week, and Joyce, who oversees it all. They are all G-Listers, originals, the imaginative team that makes it all go. They were the first to be inducted in the G-List Hall of Fame. So next week, we're going to have a special show to look back over the past 6 months with some of the more interesting, funny, provocative interviews we've had. We will celebrate number 25 with a special show looking back from the beginning, while at the same time setting our sights on the next 25. It is Women's History Month, and we will recognize not only the Kamala Harrises of the world, but also the moms, the aunts, the educators, the nurses, the grandmothers, and et cetera, the backbones and bedrocks of our families and our communities. In November, Ms. Harris was elected alongside newly elected President Joe Biden as the Vice President of the United States. She became a history maker, but not for the first time. She was born in Oakland, California. She was recruited to the San Francisco District Attorney's Office and later became the Attorney General of California. She defeated Loretta Sanchez in 2016 for the Senate election to become the second African-American woman and the first South Asian American to serve in the United States Senate. As a senator, she advocated for healthcare reform, federal descheduling of cannabis, a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants, and the DREAM Act, a ban on assault weapons, and progressive tax reform. Let me go back to those bedrocks and backbones for just a minute. I mentioned earlier to recognize 2 of the bedrocks who played a large influence in my life. And they're my mom and then Mom G. My mother and my mother-in-law, they have both passed, but both were so instrumental in my life. My mom always told me that I could do anything I wanted. She and my dad supported me in my many adventures. Mom G, my mother-in-law, was a rock and a very good friend. She too gave out love and support when and where needed. When we think about women's history, isn't the bedrock, the backbone, women represent in our lives, women's history? So today, Barbara Wallace Edwards and Mychal Walker are here with us as our roundtable guests, and our G-List guest today is historian and Professor Keith Hébert for the History Department in the College of Liberal Arts at Auburn University. So let's get to our roundtable guests, Barbara Wallace Edwards and Mychal Walker. From Birmingham. Barbara, how are you today?
Good morning, Tom. I'm doing well. How are you this morning?
I'm doing very well. So, what's going on in your world?
Well, Tom, I enjoyed the beautiful weather this weekend. I got out and did some exercise outside. Was sad that the rain moved in on yesterday, so wasn't able to get outside and do any walking. So I'm hoping we'll have better weather the rest of this week, and I'll get a chance to get outside some.
So, tell me about the bedrocks in your life.
Oh my gosh, there are so many, Tom, but I tell you, I have to start with my mother, Mrs. Josephine Law Wallace. She was my first hero. My mother, who was actually married at an early age. She and my dad married when my mom was 15 years old. They eloped
Wow.
and went to Mississippi. My mother was trying to get away from a home where her stepfather was molesting her and she was being
Mm.
abused. So it was a sad situation, but turned into a beautiful love story. She met my dad and they married, and she was a mother of two children by the time she turned 18. Did not
Wow.
have her high school diploma, but she was determined she was going back to school. So she eventually had six kids, went back to school at night to get her high school diploma. She refused to get a GED. She didn't want to take any shortcuts in life. Went on to earn her business associate's degree in college, and the rest is history. Again, she's just my personal hero.
That's wonderful. I know that you talk about mothers and we talk about women's history, but we also talk about extended family. And I hear you talk about you're an aunt, I think, to
Yes.
a couple of people. And talk about that for a minute and what that means to you and to them.
Yes, I didn't have children of my own, Tom. So my nieces and nephews and my godchildren are like my children. I feel like I've given birth to many of them and supported many of them. I lost three of my siblings very when they were very young, and they all
Wow.
had children. And I just took it upon myself to sort of help raise them. Of course, they had their mother and their father there to raise them, but I tried to spend as much time with them as I possibly could and influence all of their lives and made sure that they were able to go to college and get a good education. I've even had several of them come and live with me throughout the summers or even after they finish high school. So I take it upon myself to be a mother to some, even though I didn't give birth to children of my own.
Well, we can't all be vice president of the United States, but we can all give to others in that sense and be the backbone of families, regardless of whether they're their birth children or their aunts or nephews, nieces, or what have you. So that's wonderful. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Let's
Thank
get
you.
Mychal in here. Mychal Walker. Mychal's president of the Walker Agency, a full-service insurance brokerage firm. Mychal, how are you doing today?
I am doing well, Tom. I hope you are too. And good morning to you, Barbara.
I'm
More.
doing very well, thank you. So, Mychal, what's happening in your world?
Well, Tom, I got to tell you, there's a little tidbit that's going around. There's always a lot of talk about the cost of Medicare and how expensive it is. Well, there was a report that was generated from the Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General that states that between the years of 2014 and 2019, there was a 20% increase in the number of inpatient stays at the highest and most expensive level in hospitals. They call that Medicare severity diagnosis related groups. And just to give you an idea, in fiscal year 2019 alone, these payments equal to $109.8 billion dollars for just 8.7 million inpatient hospital stays. The report found that half of those payments, 54.6 billion, were for stays billed at the highest level. They call that upcoding, in other words. I don't know about you, but from my world, upcoding is unethical and it's called fraud. However, with all the complaints about the cost of Medicare, we need to look at the providers.
Okay.
That's one of the reasons why insurance premiums continue to go up. Insurance companies and agents and brokers like myself are blamed for it, saying it's all in our commission. Not so, according to this report.
Okay. When you say it's expensive, expensive for who?
It's expensive for the consumers, the taxpayers.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit. I wanted to ask you and Barbara about something I read at the University of Texas about the Red River shootout they had this year. Now they got some fallout from it because some of the alumni are saying that the players didn't stay on the field after the game to sing, what is it, the Eyes of Texas or whatever they sing.
The eyes of Texas are upon you.
And
Yes.
so they're upset about that. And say they're not going to give any more money if the kids don't stay out there and sing. You guys been following that? What do you think about it?
I have been following that, Tom, and I think the students should have the right to do that. I mean, that's their amendment right. If they don't want to support it, they don't want to sing that song, then they have the right to do so. You know, that's just not a issue for the University of Texas. A lot of universities are having that issue. Even the Auburn school fight song, there's a line in that song that several of our football players said they never sang that particular word or that particular line in the song. So,
Power of Dixieland.
Power of Dixieland. That's right. They, you know, several of them said they say the power of Tigerland, or they don't say anything when it comes to that particular line of the song. So, you know, that's something that's kind of a move that's going across the country right now.
Okay, that's interesting that you say that because I never sang that line, and
Right.
I just would kind of mouth something and go on. You know, I wasn't in the position when you talk about one or two black guys on a football team to publicly raise a lot of hell about it, but it's just a personal thing for me. I wasn't gonna sing. Mychal, what's your thoughts?
Well, I've kind of been following that from the time that Steve Sarkisian became the head coach of Texas. He kind of stepped in it at his opening press conference because that had already started to boil a little bit, and he came in as head coach, and they asked him what was his thoughts about the Eyes of Texas, and he said emphatically, that's our school song, and we're going to sing it, and we're going to acknowledge it. And so he got quite a bit of blowback on it, and he tried to kind of step away from it. But I find it.
I mean, who did he get the blowback from?
From students and the media. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I find it interesting that the donors is going to insist that players acknowledge, or however you want to put it, something that makes them feel uncomfortable or remind them of enslavement. And they're going to do it by means of not providing financial support to a university by which they are probably making a lot of money off of. You know,
no, you didn't go there, did you?
Oh, yes, I did. You know, and I think it's called
That's so true.
I think it's called hypocrisy, you know. So in other words, you're going to go out here and you're going to play because you earned a scholarship because of your talents, but I'm going to force you to do something that makes it uncomfortable for you. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to withhold my support from the university so that the administration is going to force you to do that to keep your scholarship.
Wow. Okay.
That's a form of enslavement right there.
I think, you know, things, there's so much that has changed over the years. There's so much that's still the same. And therefore, there's your conflict. You've got the change of these athletes who have come in, black athletes in the money-making sports, football and basketball, and who see things differently. But you've got the university and its traditions who insist that these young men honor those traditions that the young men say, well, no, that's not who I am. That's not who I want to be. And I don't know how you manage change successfully doing what you've always done.
That's right.
And I think that's our conflict these days. We're going to do it this way because we've always done it this way. And people who have come up at, you know, we were talking to our guest today earlier before the show, and he would has changed in the classroom. Well, some, of course, now they're not even in the classroom because of the COVID. And it's like, well, do you continue to do things the way you've always done them? And I think that's a big one for colleges and universities today. Other comments?
Well, change, that's the only thing that's constant is change.
Definitely.
In life.
Definitely.
However, there are people that do not want to embrace change because they feel it lessens their power or their grip on power. That's the biggest reason for the headbutting. If you just really peel back the onion and think about it.
What I don't understand is you and I have a difference of opinion about something. We know the only way to resolve that is to sit down and talk.
True.
As equals.
Right.
Right.
I don't think that the administrators see that as an equal situation. It's
That's
almost
exactly
like reading the thing at the University of Texas. It's almost like we're going to tell you what to do, and damn it, you're going to do it.
Right.
Yes.
And
yes.
These young people, I don't think they bow down to that.
That's so true.
So it's an interesting time, and I wonder as we go back to whatever is the normal going to be, what's going to happen. I didn't know that the kids at Auburn didn't sing "The Power of Dixieland." I'm proud of them because I never sang it, and
Right.
I didn't say anything to anybody. I didn't make a big deal out of it. It's something I wasn't going to do.
And I don't think the students are making a big deal. I was going to say, I don't think the students are making such a big deal about it. Some of them are just, quietly not singing it. Others have mentioned it to others. And I think even some have even mentioned it to the media. It just hasn't been a big deal as of yet. But I think it's going to probably be becoming a big deal in the near future.
I don't see, like, again, to me, that's not an insurmountable problem. Issue.
Right.
You just have to want to have a solution. And I keep coming back to two words: want to. Do they want to? And if you don't want to, then it's not going to happen. So let's, anybody got anything else you want to mention before we go to our guest?
Well, sure, Tom. I'd like to have the opportunity to acknowledge and recognize a woman that was in my life and played a very...
Oh, I'm sorry, man. Go ahead.
Well, that's quite all right. I understand. I kind of hit you with something there that made you think about something else when I talked about the Medicare and all the...
You sent me in that direction. And anyway, go ahead, Michael. You got it, baby.
Okay. I'd have to acknowledge my grandmother, Mrs. Ola Mae Hutchinson, for the contribution she made in my life. She provided me with a lot of wisdom. And Barbara was talking about her mom and father when they got married. My grandmother married my grandfather when she was 14 and my grandfather was 17. The only difference there is that my grandmother's father was a minister and my grandfather's mother was a teacher. And my grandmother's father was a minister. So they got married at the age of 17 and 14, I guess, because at that time they call it courting, or some people will say coating or whatever. So they had to get married really early. But I will say that my grandmother was quite influential in instilling a drive. Like you said that your mom said that you can do anything you want to do. One thing that my grandmother used to drill in me, she said, whatever you get in your mind, no one can take it away from you. People can take material things from you or opportunities, but the knowledge that you put in your mind, nobody can ever take it from you. So I've always tried to adhere to that and keep that within me to help me to drive and move forward. Well,
I've heard you talk about your grandparents, both of them. many, many times, and what they've instilled in you and the lessons that they gave you. And I guess we were all fortunate. My parents were married for 49 years, and before my mom passed. They were a little older when they got married, but they kind of, people call it eloped. I said they sneaked off and got married. So, but anyway, I think the thing is what women, of course we've all contributed, but what the women have contributed to our communities and our families, and also now, of course, to corporate America and our government. So we're very blessed. So I'm sorry, Mychal, is there anything else? Barbara, Mychal, anything?
No, thank you.
No, thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay. All right. Let's and you guys will get your Hall of Fame plaques soon.
Well, that's great. I always want to be in the Hall of Fame or something, you know.
Mychal,
You're in the G-List Hall of Fame, baby.
Yes.
I feel so honored to be in the G-List Hall of Fame.
It's good to be in the Hall of Fame or something rather than the Hall of Fame of my own mind. So
there you go. There you go. That's great. Well, let's get to our guest, but let's first have a message from Best Girl.
Best Girl is a consulting firm that provides customized leadership, access and inclusion, public relations, communications, and organizational consulting services. Clients include Fortune 500 companies, utilities, higher education institutions, small businesses, and associations. Best Girl's team of consultants, led by Joyce Gilly Gossom, Emily Hedrick, and Sean Jones, partners with business and education clients to promote organizational effectiveness, communication, motivation, and leadership, with always an impact on the bottom line. Best Girl's customized consulting services include strategic planning, corporate communication, executive coaching, fundraising, and economic development.
All right. Before we move on, I got Tamara Foley. Tamara, thank you for your comments. We appreciate you having you here with us this morning. Lori Wallace, the same for you. And my good friend, I haven't seen you in a while, Jose Garcia. Jose, I hope all is well, man. I look forward to seeing you, and I hope that you will have that festival again at some point. So let's get to the G list. And Hollywood's got the A list, and here at Tuesday with Thom, we've got the G list, where everybody is a star. Our G list guest this morning is Dr. Keith Hébert, Associate Professor of History at Auburn University. His research focuses on the tortured history, he calls it, of the American South. In April, his latest book, Cornerstone of the Confederacy, by Cornerstone of the Confederacy, Alexander Stephens, in the speech that defined the lost cause. It will appear and be available on Amazon. This book examines the long contested history of white supremacist rhetoric in America, especially how those falsehoods shaped how many white Southerners inaccurately commemorate the American Civil War. I want to hear about that. Also, Dr. Hébert is responsible for the awarding of the earned master's degree that Dr. Harold Franklin, the first African-American student at Auburn University. Dr. Franklin began his studies in 1964 and finally received his degree last year. So, Dr. Hébert, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me today. It's been an entertaining show.
We appreciate you being here, and I'm just reading some of the comments. Somebody suggested that we say "Power of the SEC." That would be a great compromise. I guess I don't understand where compromise is in all this, and why administrators, and not just talking about Auburn, but because I think this is a common problem across the landscape of change in the country. Mm-hmm. But when this woman, Becky Davis Gibson, has come up with Power of the SEC, how simple was that? Why could we not just do that? But we dig in. And when you dig in, it's hard to come to a compromise. So we're here. Let's talk about some of the stuff you're doing. Tell me about your book first.
Yeah, well, like you said in the introduction, my book really examines two of the great lies in sort of American history. And these are lies that continue to impact our existence to this very day. Um, one of those lies is the lie of white supremacy and the sort of fake pseudo science and fake theology that sort of built that lie of white supremacy and black inferiority on top of that. And then the lie that was built off of that, which is that the Confederate States of America, you were talking about the Dixieland reference a second ago, that the Confederate States of America was in some way created for reasons beyond just preserving slavery and white supremacy and the ideals that were sort of fundamental to the South. Both of those are enormous lies. And Alexander Stephens, the vice president of the Confederacy, at the early part of the war, he actually came out and delivered a speech called the Cornerstone Speech, where he laid out for everyone bare because he thought it was going to rally people to the cause that white supremacy and slavery were the purposes behind their rebellion against the United States. And then, just like a good PR campaign, he then spent the rest of his life, and his followers spent most of their lives in the century afterwards trying to re-explain or redefine those words. Lie even more, basically, to try to do it. And I think that's a really important thing. So another big part of the book too is to show that African Americans, how did they respond to these kind of rhetoric? And in many ways, for years and years and years, African Americans probably feeling a lot like you did, Thom, back when you were like, one of the only black people in the room in the Auburn football program. A lot of black intellectuals really fought back hard. They pushed hard against this lie. They used like primary documents and said, look, they said it here. This is what this history has to be, and really kept this debate, contested this lie in the public sphere. And the reason I think all this is important is if you can convince, millions of Americans, white Americans mostly, that the lost cause, that this idea that slavery and white supremacy are not sort of foundational to Southern society and American society, if you can convince them that all of that's a lie or that all that just doesn't exist, it's real easy to convince them of other things like, I don't know, the last election was stolen or other sorts of lies that are out there. I think there is an intellectual history to falsehoods and lies. And, once they become sort of part of like a pop culture of sorts, they're really hard, as we know, they're really hard to refute. It's almost, more difficult to break down a lie than it is to defend a truth sometimes. So, yeah.
I agree with that 100%. Let me ask you before I bring Mychal and Barbara on. How did you get interested, not just in history, but in this particular history? I think Southern history, Southern history as it relates to race.
Sure. I mean, I grew up in the South. I'm from Northwest Georgia, and the community I was born in is near Kingston, Georgia. And when I was a little kid, they take our school to to decorate the graves of Confederate soldiers. We went on field trips that were always sort of Civil War Confederate celebration kind of trips and stuff. And as a kid, I don't know if I was just weird or different, but I was always kind of wondering, like, well, why are we doing this? Because there's got to be some other story, to all of this. And when I was really young, one of my teachers took us to a Confederate memorabilia shop. It's kind of a weird field trip, right, for a fifth grade class or something. But it was run by a guy who was a very out in the open Ku Klux Klan's member and white supremacist. I mean, even as a 10-year-old boy, I could recognize the stuff that's around. And I just remember during that trip, me and this African American classmate of mine got thrown out of the shop because he thought I was a Jew, which is, I don't, the mind of these folks is just crazy. But I just remember sitting out on the bench with my fellow black student for hours, waiting for the class to end their field trip, because they
Wow.
didn't end the field trip. They kept going. So I don't know. I guess I'm just kind of the person that always questions kind of things in society and wants to kind of know more. And, and so, and I grew up pretty poor. I mean, I wasn't exactly privileged. You were talking about women. I came from a single mother, single parent household where my mom, did, if I didn't have my mom, I wouldn't be anywhere in life. That's for sure. But, I kind of saw, I don't know what it's like to be Black in America, necessarily, but I do know what it's like to kind of be on the bottom rung and, sort of, being told more often what to think and what to do, because you don't have power, you don't have anything, right? So, yeah, I guess that's kind of it,
Let me ask you this question. And we're in this period where there's a lot of disagreement, some of it spoken, most of it quiet. I'll just call up and tell them I ain't going to give any more money, and that'll change the direction of the trajectory of whatever we're doing. And you talked about going to the Confederate memorial and the store and stuff like that. Is it possible to have both? Is it possible that we can have this man's name on the building who was a slaveholder and still be able to tell the history of this total environment that say Black people didn't come until the 60s? So is it possible but that gives 40, 50, 60 years of history. Is it possible to have both?
Yeah. What I do as a public historian, I think about those questions all the time, especially as debates about, Confederate commemorations and monuments have really raged. I used to really hope that, these kind of commemorative places could be a place for discourse, where we could talk about these things, where, we could show factual information. And like you were talking about with Mychal earlier, have a conversation on equal grounds, However, when I was finishing up my book, I took a trip to Colfax, Louisiana. I was out there to do a talk, and Colfax is one of the sites of one of the worst racial atrocities in American history. I mean, a Black elected government in Colfax, Louisiana was overthrown by former Confederates violently and resulted in the deaths of hundreds of people. And to commemorate that event, the white people of Colfax, Louisiana, erected a monument to white supremacy in their cemetery. It literally says this is built in honor of white supremacy. Well, when I went out there for my book, I was interested in this monument because that's what I'm writing about. I had heard that there'd been other signage, like other voices, besides the white supremacist one, erected around town to help tell the story of what really happened there. And I was really saddened to discover that, this is just last year. So it's like 2020, that there is no other side to that story in Colfax, Louisiana, other than when I talked to African Americans in that community who are like, yeah, this is all lies. The white people in Colfax still describe this horrific incident as a Black riot, as a mob. And it really left me to the point where I'm not really sure. It's kind of like power has to be met with power to some degree. And I don't know if there's a conversation on equal footing that can be had, and I used to think like, hey, let's have a conversation. Let's put up another sign that tells the real story of what happened, and now, yeah, I'm probably more on the line of let's just tear them down because, they're such entrenched symbols of power that the people who control them really aren't that interested in even starting that conversation. And the only time they're going to probably get interested is when we tear down 80% of their monuments or something like that. I mean, they might want to talk then, maybe.
The legislature passed another law saying it's going to cost you $100,000 to take this monument down or what have you.
Yeah,
So I'm going to get Mychal and Barbara in here and for a couple questions, and then I'll hang around as well. Barbara, you want to go first?
Yes, I'll go first. Dr. Hébert, thank you for joining us today. one of my questions is, you talked a lot about your mother and you're growing up poor. Tell us about the demographics of the neighborhood you grew up in. Did you grow up around in a diverse neighborhood?
Yeah.
How did you become about as being so open-minded and liberal-minded? I'll say even. Just tell us about your upbringing.
Well, I had a rough sort of childhood. I mean, my father left when I was really young. He was just kind of a rambling man. The Allman Brothers song is probably about him, and but fortunately, my mother is a rock, and she raised two children on her own. It wasn't easy. I mean, we lived in a trailer park for a while, lived in mobile homes most of my childhood and all. I grew up in a real rural area. I mean, today it's part of Metro Atlanta, but back then it was pretty rural. You took a school bus for an hour to go to school. That's how far away the schools were and stuff. And, a lot of kids I grew up with didn't have much, to be honest with you. And, what I had at times seemed like a lot compared to most folks around me. There's a very famous book about Alabama called Let Us Praise Famous Men, that are sort of photographs of the Great Depression. And I remember I didn't see that book until I got to college, and I'm looking at the faces in this book, these very stark images of Walker Evans, and I remember thinking instantly, like, I met these kids like on the school bus,
Wow.
Every morning, kids who didn't have food, who the bus driver was giving them food every day just so they'd have something to eat. So that kind of stuff really stuck with me. The inequity of society kind of stuck, I think, early on. I'm not some kind of Marxist or anything, but you'd have to be blind to not look around and go, well, my school doesn't have squat. But in a more affluent area in our county, that school seems to have everything. They've got resources and things that we just don't even have. Where I was raised in Kingston Elementary too, the color line there was really obvious. There was a actually Michelle Obama's grandmother, if I remember right, is from Kingston, Georgia, of all things. But the color line there, even for a little white kid who really doesn't know very much, you're talking 8 years old, it's really obvious, because as our bus goes around picking up kids every day, we clearly cross into sort of another world, at least to me, another world, a world that I wasn't as familiar with. And actually, I hate to say it, I think those bus rides probably did more for me than anything, because, in this weird bus world, it's sort of this lowercase democratic world where, kids are interacting with each other without the parents and without society sort of telling them to not be together. And, I learned a lot, talking and listening or just watching, out the window every day, trying to get a sense of what, people's lives were like. So,
you can say that you were exposed to that and that influenced you, but then some people can be exposed to that and it'll send them in the other direction.
yeah.
They'll have a hard
Right.
line because they don't want to be associated with
Yeah,
that.
I may
Right.
just be weird because, like I said, I don't do Facebook, for example, and one of the reasons I don't do Facebook, nothing against my former friends and stuff, but I'm probably the only person who thinks like me in my group, and for whatever reason. Now that partially drives my scholarship, trying to explain that, like how did we all see the same things? How do we all interact?
Right.
And some of these folks are very sort of anti Black Lives Matter, anti, very pro sort of police. The police are always putting down black riots, kind of rhetoric. I struggle to explain that. That is one thing I'm definitely trying to understand.
And I'm going to get to Mychal. I just want to say, I think what's really interesting is they'll talk to you about black riots or what have you, but then they'll talk to me and they don't use that language.
Yeah.
They don't talk
Right.
about that language. And
Right.
it was a while, I think before the last president, we very seldom used the word lie in public. We very seldom talked about somebody lying, particularly somebody at that level of our society. And now it's just become common that, okay, you're lying. Let's move on. Mychal.
Yes. Dr. Hébert, I wanted to ask you a question in regards to the Confederacy. You've written several articles and publications on the Confederacy and what's going on. Tell me, in your opinion, of all the states that were involved in the Confederacy, which state was the lead dog, so to speak? Which state was prominent, played the leading role?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You know, there's sort of the rhetorical lead dog who barked the loudest and got the most attention. That would be sort of South Carolina, where you have these real radical, sort of aggressive slave defenders of slavery who not only defended slavery in America, but really saw a vision of American slavery expanding across the Western Hemisphere again. I mean, they had grandiose dreams for what this new Confederate government would do, you know, beyond just preserving it here, you know. But a place like Alabama played a central role. Alabama had a sort of a large white population who, you know, about 40% of those folks owned slaves or were connected to slavery in a way. But then you had this large sort of non-slave owning white population. And, in a place like Alabama, it was really important for the Confederacy to convince those non-slave holding whites that the Confederacy was acting in their interest, that it was serving their cause. And one of the ways they did that, is to try to, rally around the notion of white supremacy, and to play upon fears of Black emancipation, of the miscegenation of the races, and things like that. And Alabama had several figures that were really critical in kind of shaping that narrative. In Alabama, you might find in some places they celebrate William Lowndes Yancey. William Lowndes Yancey, one of the great sort of, well, I say great, but one of the orators in Alabama. But that was very much his rhetoric. At Auburn University, the father, we have Sanford Hall. The big thing. His father, John Sanford, who lived at Sunny Slope, which is actually a building Auburn University owns. He was a very sort of staunch sort of defender of white supremacy, and also a staunch sort of propagandist of trying to sort of build that bridge between rich slave owners and poor whites, and used the language of fear, of lies, basically, to try to drive those people into the army. So yeah, a place like Alabama is really critical. Alabama kind of sat off on the sidelines, for the war. The Confederacy would have lost an enormous amount of white and Black, labor that it needed for the war.
Okay. I will like to follow up with that since you brought up Auburn University and the role. I saw a media appearance in which I think you discuss why Auburn is losing Black students. Would you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, as a lot of the groups that have contacted me about, have observed, I mean, Auburn University does not reflect the sort of demographics of the state of Alabama, especially the demographics of the Alabama Black Belt, which we are right on the, either we're in it or right on the edge of it, right? And so what explains this, why is Auburn University, having a problem? I mean, there's multiple answers to that, unfortunately. One part is money, right? Does Auburn University find creative ways to build scholarships or recruitment opportunities for African American students, just general population students? Are we spending as much time going into predominantly Black high schools in Alabama, places like Robert E. Lee High School in Montgomery or Jefferson Davis High School that are 99.9% Black? Are we sending faculty, recruiters beyond the athletic department, into those places to make those connections? Or, and again, I don't want to be too, got to be careful, where I eat, but, are we sending those recruiters to like very affluent private schools in Boulder, Colorado, Chicago? Auburn is really trying hard to bring in out-of-state students, largely because it's a good for the bottom line at Auburn University. And I think some of those efforts, unfortunately, have been part of the problem, of not recruiting. So there's a interest there. But then on top of that, you've got sort of these, I guess some people call them microaggressions, or, you've got this culture in which African American students don't feel welcome, at Auburn University. They don't feel sometimes as part of the whatever the mainline culture of the university campus is. I have Black students tell me, from time to time of, just crazy comments you get in class. When you're in a big class and there's 2 or 3 Black students and there's 75, white students, and white students just don't even think about stupid stuff they can say sometimes, and just sort of these sort of stereotyping that occurs. And when that gets out in the public, right, it makes you really feel unwelcome to be part of it. So, there's a lot of, the answer to that question is a lot. A lot of it could be resolved with some very simple things, I think, actually. Part of it's, raising money for scholarships and going out and recruiting the best Black students across the country, to come to Auburn University. But a big part of it, too, is, trying to, change the culture of Auburn, as best we can. The culture that, unfortunately, is a little closer to the stuff that I write about as a scholar than it is in the culture of sort of inclusiveness and opportunity. I know when you mention the word inclusiveness, there are many people at Auburn, let's just keep it very general, people at Auburn who immediately push back, and they'll say, well, university shouldn't be in the business of inclusiveness or diversity. That's some kind of natural thing that should take place. But what they fail to realize is they build a structure that is not natural, and it's something somebody built, right? That is very much denying that inclusiveness and that diversity, or at least, trying to sort of, prevent it from happening, I guess.
Let's, Mychal, were you done?
Well, and you may want to follow up on this, Thom, but I think it's interesting on the flip side that just the opposite is happening at the University of Alabama. Yet that's where George Wallace stood in the doors and said, segregation now, segregation forever. It seems as though they have taken that and built upon it. And I find that very interesting, the difference.
Yeah, part of that is even with Harold Franklin's story, at Auburn, the way in which, Auburn tries to tell a different story about how it was integrated. And, Auburn kind of, likes to tell this myth to a great degree that this was integration that happened without much conflict, without the types of, kind of protests that you saw at the University of Mississippi or some of these other places, or at the University of Alabama, that they were somehow more benevolent in their integration. And, we know all of that's a lie, and by telling that lie, again, getting back to my research, it kind of gives you this false sense of like you've accomplished something that you didn't really accomplish. You're taking credit for something you didn't really do, right? And by doing that, it just, it's built sort of a buffer that, again, I think is one of the obstacles sort of preventing Auburn from emerging into a more diverse, inclusive type environment. History matters. History is power, so.
I've always been a history person, and I agree with you. It matters quite a bit. And one of the quotes that I use when I'm in these discussions is, our history is our history. And until you own up to it, you're going to always have these kinds of issues. Let me ask you one more. Let me ask you about Mr. Franklin, Dr. Franklin, Harold Franklin. How'd you get? And Harold Franklin was the first African-American student at Auburn University. I think it's January 3rd, 1964. Under a court order, Auburn had refused to integrate throughout the court system, throughout the let's just do it because it's the right thing to do way of things, until finally Dean Foy was served and they had to integrate. And it's true that the integration was uneventful if you consider the fact that he was escorted by 100 policemen on campus. If you consider the fact that he was put in a wing of the dorm by himself, nobody on the floor but him. If you consider that peaceful, then we probably need to have a discussion. So, but tell me how you got involved with Dr. Franklin, and what was your aim there in getting this degree for him, or him earning his degree, which he did.
Yeah, Tom, like you're saying, that's kind of part of the lie, right? That there's this myth of how this took place. And so, oddly, I first encountered Harold Franklin's version of what had happened, which is the truth, but the version of what has happened, in an article that appeared in AL.com. At the time, Kay Ivey was under fire for her appearance in blackface that was in some of the yearbooks and so forth. And in that article, they had reached out to Harold Franklin to ask his thoughts, because that was the same time that Harold Franklin was, integrating Auburn. And at the end of this very long article, Harold's like, oh, and by the way, after Auburn admitted me, the history department denied me the degree that I rightfully earned. They basically, for all sorts of reasons, mostly racism, kind of drove me out of the department. And I went and talked to faculty at Auburn who'd been around longer than I have. And a lot of them like, well, we've heard Harold talk. He's come to events. We gave him an honorary doctorate. We didn't know this story. And what I found out is they just didn't listen to that part of the story usually, And so thankfully, I reached out to Harold, and we went to go visit him. And thank goodness Harold is a bit of a hoarder like I am, pack rat. Because what we needed him to do is, I recognize the fact that he rightfully earned a master's degree back in like 1967. There's no doubt. Okay. What we needed to happen, though, is that he still had that master's thesis from then, because we didn't want to have a situation where, 87-year-old Harold Franklin needs to write a thesis again. We get to his apartment, though, and we're like, Harold, do you by chance have this? And it took him a minute. He's like, well, I'm not really, and we found it within like 90 seconds. The thing had meant a lot to him. He had kept it, and he had, so, we made the administrative hoops, kind of work. We tried to keep the story kind of quiet because, I don't want to criticize Auburn overly, but we didn't want to turn this into the story of, hey, look at all the wonderful things Auburn's done. This is, we messed up and we need to make an amends, and we need to make the amends to Harold, as much as we can. And so we got through all the different permissions. We held a very real, sometimes the newspapers will describe it as a ceremonial event. It wasn't ceremonial. We held a master's defense for Harold Franklin, and he did a really good job. Harold asked him one question. He talked for 2 hours. That was awesome. We basically asked him, like, why'd you write? He wrote a thesis on Alabama State University's history, one that he didn't want to write. When he was at Auburn, he wanted to write about the civil rights movement that he was involved in, but they told him, nah, you can't do that. So I asked that question. He told the whole horrible tale of what happened to him here at Auburn, which I think that gets sort of whitewashed a lot, right? The trauma that he went through as being sort of isolated as a black student on that dormitory from others, the comments, the microaggressions he received all over campus, his inability. It really changed his life. Imagine a world where Harold Franklin gets his master's degree in 1967. He wanted to go on to law school. Maybe he does that. Maybe he is, the leader of something bigger in Auburn, but Auburn denied him of that for quite some time. So we just wanted to set the record straight. And luckily Harold was very, willing to do that. I was a little worried when I first called him that Harold would be like, you got to be crazy. Y'all are 50 years too late, and I realized that, and I tried to acknowledge that as much as we could, but yeah, so that's kind of how it happened. It was,
I've always found him to be a generous man, quiet, respectful. He doesn't talk ugly about Auburn. He feels like it was something that happened in his life, and he's moved on. And as a matter of fact, when he really starts talking about it, he'll tell you, I didn't want to do that anyway. Mr. Gray kind of talked him into it. His attorney, Fred Gray.
Right.
He's
How-
always
Right.
he's always quick to say he didn't want to come to Auburn to begin with, and that's not exactly something Auburn wants to put out on the front of its PR
Yeah.
page, but the bigger hurdle, getting in the master degree is one thing. In that process, our department issued an apology to Harold, a sort of historical document acknowledging what had happened, and all the members of our department signed that, including some of our admin. But the real hard step was, okay, now that you do that, right, that's what I can kind of control in the world of Auburn. How do you now get the administration or people above you to take the steps to address this publicly? When Auburn talks about Harold, they still tend to talk about Harold as a great example of perseverance, which he certainly is, no doubt, but they don't necessarily go, oh, by the way, Auburn acted in ways that are contrary to our sort of foundational beliefs. And we need to acknowledge fully acknowledge what we did to Harold and what we denied Harold. I think that's kind of important to kind of move forward in some sort of way. But they tend to stop just short of doing that, just short of, doing what's, in my opinion, fully right. But
We've got about 4 or 5 minutes left. Barbara, you got anything else you want to get you and Mychal in here one more time? Barbara?
Yes, I do. Dr. Hébert, I know that recently Auburn University were named the student center after Harold Melton, who was the first Black SGA president of Auburn University. And several alums and others in this community have asked, why not name a building after Dr. Harold Franklin? Has there been any talk on campus about possibly naming a building after Dr. Franklin?
yes, I mean, when we started going down this road to holding a defense for Harold Franklin's thesis that he earned. We did not give him a thesis. He earned his master's degree, no doubt. Those conversations were part of that. And, those are thorny conversations right now at Auburn. We've had meetings and discussions of finding ways. And, they recently renamed 2 dormitory buildings, right? After one of the first Black graduates of Auburn. And, so, the administration's mind, they're making some steps. Why they didn't name one of these buildings after Harold Franklin, or, I don't, well, I think I know why, but I'm not 100% certain why. I can't speak for them. My opinion, and let me emphasize my opinion on this, is that Harold is more of the troublemaker, right? I mean, Harold sued the university. He kicked the door down. He is a civil rights activist in every stretch of the word, right? Every use of the word. And I'm not saying that's the sole reason, but, his story is more complicated than some of the ones they want to, name. So there is a movement. My department, I can speak for my department. I mean, we're in Thatch Hall, which is right across from Haley Center.
Yes.
We would support the renaming of Thatch Hall after Harold Franklin, and we've made that vocal to people above us. But, as you know, at Auburn, they'll make the excuse like, well, the state passed this law and we can't just go around renaming stuff, even though everybody else is doing it. I mean, I thought I thought we were Auburn University and we just do what we want pretty much.
Right.
But for reasons that just confound me, we're not doing that. So I don't know if they've got some grand plan. I doubt it, but it should be done. It should happen.
Mychal, you got something quickly here? We got about a minute.
Yes. Well, it costs $25,000 to change the name of the building. So, but anyway, you went to undergrad, I think, at West Georgia. Is that a military college?
No, it's a little land grant school. It's from the second round of land grants in Georgia. So it's very similar to Auburn, just smaller in scale. And, I think, again, y'all were asking me earlier about what shapes me a little bit. I mean, that school was way more diverse than the sort of education I had growing up. I mean, it had a larger Black student population. What I really loved about the school is most of the students there worked like full-time jobs and went to school, had families. I mean, they were juggling a lot of stuff. And, even I was working most of the time when I was an undergrad. So, just watching people and sort of seeing the lived experiences of them, gave me a greater, I think, appreciation of education, right? Just how hard it is to attain and how much people have to sacrifice to get a hold of it, right? It's not just something that, for some people, it's something that's just given to them. For most of the students at West Georgia, it's something they really have to earn and work hard to do.
Okay, well, I'm going to close this out with in the film Quiet Courage, the James Owen story. David Housel, who is, of course, is a legend at Auburn, a man who loves Auburn dearly, made the statement talking about the integration of James Owens onto the football team. He was the only black football player. David Housel said, that's kind of like the little boy that goes to the beach and he runs down to the water and he sticks his toe in the water and he runs back and said, "Man, I've been in the ocean." That was his comparison to the type of integration. So, Dr. Hébert, we appreciate you, man. It's been absolutely wonderful to give us these history lessons and to talk to us today. We appreciate it. You got anything you want to close out with?
No, I just want to thank you. And again, when you're talking about I want to thank my mother, Susan Hébert, who, like I said, if it wasn't for her, I definitely wouldn't be where I am today. So there's no doubt about that. But thank you all.
All righty. Okay.
Thank you.
That is our show. We appreciate it. I'm a little bit past time, so I will save Fannie Lou Hamer for another time. That's our show. I want to thank the audience. We appreciate you. I want to thank Mychal Barber, our G-List guest, Dr. Hébert. Thank our sponsor, Best Girl. If you're interested in having your business be a sponsor of the show, get in touch with us. Thank Emily Hedrick, the communicator, our producer, Sean Jones, the organizer. That's a wrap. Enjoy yourself. Make every day count. Stay safe and peace.